Hi, everyone. Welcome to the National Parents Union Nightly Restorative Check-In. I am Dr. Enjolie LaFarie. I am here in Otham Territory on this beautiful Sonoran Desert in Arizona. Today is March 5th, 2021. That's crazy. And I feel like I'm really feeling this week from like my level of fatigue. And this isn't the first moment that I've sat down, but my body is really ready to let go and rest tonight. So I hope you have a little bit more energy than I do. And if you don't, I hope that you'll be able to get some good rest. Okay, so this show, the Nightly Restorative Check-In, is the brainchild of Marisol Quevedo Rerucha. She's the host on Mondays and Wednesdays, and I come on and host on Friday. So you want to make sure that you check this out on Mondays and Wednesdays to see her. She has some great guests. But when she thought of and conceived of this show, the Nightly Restorative Check-In, the way that I envision it is, kind of checking in, having a social, emotional connection, kind of like that contact. I think about the things that I want to be doing on a Friday. I want to chill. I want good food. I want to be with like the one or two people that I'm close to. Truth be told, you guys, I'm like this. I realize I'm a little antisocial. But anyway, I want to be with, that's why I say the one or two people that I want to be with. So I want to be with them, and it's the opportunity to really have somebody ask how you're doing and to be able to respond fully. Not all of us, but hopefully most of us don't have to work tomorrow, don't have to do as much, and so we can really kind of do that deep check-in. Marisol brought me on early on in the show. So NPU is a little bit over a year old now. And when the show started, she brought me on as one of her original guests. And the reason why is because I'm a psychologist and a hypnotherapist. And on that show, I demonstrated or kind of showed the audience the breath pattern titled 4-7-8. So both she and I open up our show with that same pattern, and we're going to do that right now. So let me explain it first for those who are new. You are inhaling for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 7 seconds, and then exhaling for 8 seconds. And then we go through that breath pattern 4 times around. I will count it out for you. I highly recommend that you close your eyes, or at minimum that you kind of find a focal point as you're going through the breath pattern. The reason for that is because our visual field is one of our greatest senses. And so when something passes through that visual field, we tend to get distracted. When you're trying to do something a little bit meditative, it pulls you out. Sorry, y'all, I'm tired. I told you. This breath pattern, it is excellent if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're struggling with insomnia. I use it as a transition. And so kind of almost the way that I'm inviting you all to use it here as a way to arrive, so if I'm going from meeting to meeting, and I just need something to mark the beginning and the end of time and space, that's kind of how I use it. This breath pattern is also really good to reduce your anxiety. Okay, let me calm my energy down. You guys know I have to come in and greet you. So I need to pick up my energy, but I've got to relax. Okay. So I'm going to encourage you to close your eyes if that's what you're doing, if it's possible. If not, pick a focal point. Go ahead and take a natural breath, just breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth. And on the next inhalation, take it in for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale. 3, 2, 1. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale. 3, 2, 1. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale. 3, 2, 1. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Go back to your natural breath. I hope that you feel a little relaxed. I hope that your shoulders have dropped. Maybe you were able to yawn. Maybe you even heard your tummy digest. Those are some of the ways that we know that we've switched from our sympathetic system to our parasympathetic system, basically a relaxation response. One of these days, I'm going to have on the person who taught me this breath pattern, and we'll have a whole show dedicated to like relaxation response and stress response and things like that. Okay, so let me finish kind of introducing myself a little bit more, announcements, and then we'll introduce our guest for today, which I'm really excited to have on. Originally, I am from Southern California. My father was Afro-Cuban, so we are at Taino and Arawak. My mom is from Guatemala, so we come from Maya territory. Some of you have seen or witnessed my sister and my brother. They were some of my original guests back almost a year ago. I didn't start right away with the show, but somewhere in 2020. They were my original guests. I'm a mom to a 21-year-old daughter, and I'm also a part of the Siwapatli Collective. That is kind of my community identity. And that's actually, my guest is a member of the collective. We focus on Indigenous families, supporting Indigenous women and mothers. We like to say from womb to tomb. And you've seen you've seen several of my comadres and elders kind of appear on this show before. Okay, so quickly, I just want to encourage you all to become members of the National Parents Union. It is free, and it allows you to kind of get information maybe ahead of time. It allows you to register for our amazing town halls. Our last one was about 2 weeks ago, and we had Tamika Mallory, kind of one of the originators of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we've had Dolores Huerta. So it's just great all around for you to get informed about all the things that are occurring with NPU. All right, so I am going to introduce, and in a second here, I'm going to bring you on, Nicole, because I want to. I'm going to bring you on right now. And then I'm going to read your bio, and people can see you, and forgive the little swap, y'all. Hi. So Nicole, my comadre, she is the Digital Inclusion Library Consultant at the Arizona State Library. We're going to talk about this, what an Arizona State Library is. It is not ASU, Arizona State. Yes, and you work in the archives and public records. You're an archivist turned library consultant. So we're going to unpack that and see what that is. Nicole supports libraries on projects such as improving library technology and broadband networks. Wow, y'all, we're going to get through this hour, I promise. Wi-Fi hotspots and laptop lending. She works on issues of digital literacy and online learning and the digital preservation of culture and language. Hello, Nicole.
Hi, Enjolie.
How are you? I can hear you.
Okay, great. I test that out.
I saw you lean in like I was going to hear you differently. Oh man,
I don't know how the Zoom gods work.
Well, the Zoom gods are not going to work here because it's StreamYard, but I feel
great. Great. I gotta redo it.
Oh, God,
I'm good. How are you, Enjolie?
Good. I'm not loyal to anyone. Here's Jen, another one of our comadres enjoying us. So I'm good. Like I said, I'm tired, and I'm feeling it. So yes. So I introduced you professionally. We definitely know that we are going to have to kind of unpack some of what you do because some of the titles may not be familiar, but are there any other parts of who you are that you would like to bring into the room this evening?
Mm-hmm. I really love this question, and it got me at a good time in my life where I'm comfortable bringing my whole self with me in all these different spheres that I inhabit and that I get to be present in. Of course, I identify as a comadre with the Siwapatli Collective, and learning about really embracing and reclaiming a lot of our ancestral knowledge has been such an important part of my journey to really push me to accelerate in my career, as well as to just embrace all parts of myself. I come from Ilocano and Finnish ancestry, so I do have both parts of those, and I definitely identify as a very multicultural, colonized person now living here in the U.S. And another piece of me is that I actually have family from the First Nations up in BC area too. So I had a very diverse, if you want to call it that, upbringing, and have been able to just work with a lot of different groups and know people as my family, and in partnership for different professional work as well. I'm also a community advocate, and I organize with Mutual Aid Phoenix here in the Valley. I support that on a few different levels for whatever wacky projects we have cooked up. And I also am a musician, and I play for a hula band where we accompany dancers and spread aloha wherever we get to.
So awesome. I know parts of you, but I don't know. I didn't know all of it, and I thought they were always so cool to hear it. Remember, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know, like I told you that before. It's really weird. Maybe you want to mute while I'm talking, and then it'll probably. Oh, I see. I can't even hear it now. Okay. Anyway, but it's so cool to hear kind of everything laid out that way. And yes, I've heard your music. It's amazing. And you do a lot of work with mutual aid. In fact, your house is like a mutual aid site. We could probably spend an entire hour talking about that, but we won't. Okay, so let's have you start off just by checking in, right? And, I really want to know how you're doing. And please take your time as much as you want to kind of let us know what's going on in your world.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for leading us in some of those breathing techniques. I feel like I had a really nice release from some of the work stress going into preparing for kind of a busy weekend. When I was thinking about this question, for this current point in time, I really feel quite activated, actually, where I have some, redoubled efforts for work and some guidance, and I've gotten some good feedback about how to clarify what I'm doing a little bit more broadly. And so that feels like where it was a little bit more challenging over the past few months, but I'm now feeling like ready to spring and ready to move forward with some big projects and the things that we're building. At the same time, I feel pretty burnt out and pretty tired just from a lot of change that's coming into my life outside of work as well. But when I really think about it, I'm feeling pretty free. I told you just a little bit earlier that I'm actually getting ready to move away from the Phoenix Valley to try living in Flagstaff, Arizona. Just a little 6-month experiment. And ever since I kind of manufactured that change in my life, I felt so much lighter and free to, kind of release some things that I was holding on to about my current space, and just get ready to, get myself a change of scenery and a new environment to focus on areas of my life. So it's a really great feeling that I didn't know I was missing for so long. That idea of, I have the freedom and flexibility to try something new, and to let go of other parts.
Let's give people context, those who, because we're viewed nationally, but so Phoenix to Flagstaff is maybe 2 hours or so in, drive time. And Flagstaff, right, is our northern area. It's where if there is going to be snow in Arizona, right, it's usually in Flagstaff. So yeah, just to kind of let, so people know what we're referencing. And yes, I'm glad you told me, because I don't know where my reaction would have been if you told me live. I would have been like, Nicole, like, who am I going to talk about astrology stuff with? That's actually my real reaction. And I think it would have been my reaction had I just found out here. But yeah, I imagine that the process that you're going through with one, creating this opportunity, but more so shifting into this opportunity, I don't think is that different for some folks here in this year during the pandemic. Like, I made some of those shifts, so talk us through that process. Like, how did you come to making the shift to say, I'm going to go somewhere else for 6 months and test it out and see if that's, a cool thing. What was your process like?
Well, I wish I had a process more than just this is a feeling that had kind of been building up for a little while, that I just wanted to take a little bit of time to find some more quiet. And I really love that area of the state as well. I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest. Here in the Phoenix area, we're in the desert, but up in Flagstaff, there's pine trees. It looks a lot more like the Northwest. It's at 7,000 feet. And we mentioned I currently live in a mutual aid house, so it's sort of a 24/7 effort of supporting our community, building the safe space that we envision in the world, and doing what we can to redistribute goods and get really the survival needs of our community met, which I've really loved doing, and I've loved learning how to live intentionally and in some ways strategically with community in that way. But it also means that it's really hard to turn off those parts of myself when that organization is actually happening within my home. It essentially looks like a food pantry in the front part of our house, where things are always coming in and going out, which I've really loved participating and really building that with our house. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe I'm mid-career at this point. Been in the workforce for about 8 years or so, but really knowing that if I want to step up in other ways, that I need to take a little bit of a pause from running myself raggedy in all these other areas in my life. So I'm so blessed to be able to work remotely, have a stable income, have the ability to live anywhere in the state. I'm still a state employee. And so I thought that Flagstaff would be a great 6-month experiment for that.
Good for you. And hello, Vicki. I don't know who you are, but maybe you know Nicole. I hear you on the privilege, and then to be able to kind of go anywhere. I've been really enjoying that, like with my work as well. And then also every time I say that, I think about the people who don't have that ability, and want to honor that reality as well. I also, because we talked about mutual aid, let's go there really fast. You did describe, what it was, but can you explain the origins of mutual aid? You and I have talked about this, and I will be really honest with you that I did not see the topic, or just didn't see that phrase mutual aid until this pandemic, but it's something that is historical and has existed obviously in the past. Where does mutual aid come from?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right that it's historic in a sense that it's really just caring for each other, sharing what we have. Some people will cite, indigenous caregiving ethics as the original mutual aid. How I see it described more is really about survival pending the fall of empire, right? How are we establishing community networks? And really, by community, we mean tight-knit neighborhood pods to make sure that everybody's basic survival needs are met. It tends to attract people who, have sometimes anarchist politics or sometimes leftist politics, but really it's just about participation and mobilizing community members directly rather than waiting for support from the state. In Phoenix, the group is actually organized by 2 different women of color in the Phoenix area who saw this need for communities to get food, to get diapers, to get even just friendly check-ins from people who are going to be most impacted by the pandemic. So as an organization, we formed together in March of 2020, but the practice of mutual aid is really ongoing. And we've even seen that rise of mutual aid groups being more visible in all these other natural disaster crises, and in Texas with the snowstorms and the electricity being shut off for so long. It was those mutual aid groups that were already in place that were mobilized to really help people immediately.
Yeah, so I mean, it's community support, right? It is folks helping one another out, making sure that they have the things that they need, like you said, and really focused on like tangible goods, right? But then also the connection that is so important. So yeah, gosh, thank you so much for your work. I can only imagine, you know, and I remember when we would be on our calls and things like that for the collective, that, you know, we'd talk about like all the things that you have kind of coming into your home and the front space of your home and how you all are organizing it. How many people do you have living in your house, if I may ask?
Right now there's 8.
Is that a little or a lot?
Exactly. And as I think about it, you know, I didn't know what mutual aid was, even though we were doing it for so long. We call our token anarchist who was living at the time, who was talking about it before the pandemic. And, you know, as our community house, we kind of have consensus rules together. We figure out how to live in a way that supports all of our well-being. And so we kind of had these community care ethics already. But getting connected with Mutual Aid Phoenix and establishing our house as a drop site really gave us more structure and helped us to share out with our broader community, as opposed to just creating a safe space for whoever happens to be in the house at once.
And I remember really fast, one more point before we move on to, you know, your library work, that you and I were talking about how essentially this is what the Black Panthers did, right? Or we're doing. This is, you know, what different groups in history have done. And when you gave me that example, it solidified for me. I was like, oh, okay. It's just like, it's community support. It's community work, you know? And I guess the Black Panther reference for me was like thinking about school lunches, right? So that school, like, maybe you don't know that like our school lunch program started off of the model of what the Black Panthers were doing, and all that social support services. Sure, we had things like that before, but maybe not as organized. And when somebody's doing it well, whether or not we give them credit, right? We have modeled it off of these type of mutual aid systems. Do you have anything to add to that, or did I get?
Well, even thinking about, you know, because when I participate in some of the decision making and community building in that space, I think about, we do this in the Seapapli Collective, like it's food distribution, it's the ethic of being a comadre, it's that same support. So it's really, you know, there's the branding or the name of it, but it's really just about ethic of care and really demanding that world that we want to be in.
Our
token anarchist is here now.
Because we all need an anarchist in our life. Hello, Kay. Thank you for being who you are. Yes, and you're right. We do it as the collective, you know. And actually, you know, I don't know that I talk about that enough. But some of the things that we do as a collective, a lot of our work is supporting moms in their postpartum phase during their cuarentena. Cuarentena is the 40 days, right, postpartum, where depending on, you know, cultural beliefs, some families, some birthing folks will not leave the house, right? Or will leave the house minimally to heal and to kind of have all parts of who they are, mental, spiritual, emotional, right? Kind of come together is the way that I think about it, you know, because what it took to birth, right? That opening, kind of letting light in, right? We want to make sure that kind of closes in a good and proper way for the sake of the family's health, the birthing person's health, and then the connection, right, between mother and child. So yeah, we do stuff like meal trains, and we do stuff like we go and clean each other's houses, and I don't know, what do we not do? You know what I mean? Like we talk to each other, we text one another. We just do things in community. So, okay. Thank you for bringing up the collective. I want to transition to your work. So I feel like let's start at square one. All right. So when I was very thoughtful about, or intentional, I should say, about properly reading where you work. So you work at the Arizona State Library. So we're here in Arizona, we have Arizona State University. And I said, it's not ASU. I did not know, like you've said it before, but I did not know that states have libraries. Because in my mind, I think of, I go to my city library, right? And I go check out a book, and it's brick and mortar, and I go in. But you have educated me, and so if you could educate all of us, the role of state libraries, what they do, and just how everything interacts.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I work for the Arizona State Library Archives and Public Records, and it's actually a division of the Arizona Secretary of State's office. Every state and U.S. territory does have a type of state library, but sometimes that's embedded in the Department of Education. Sometimes it's its own standalone type of entity, and there's a few other states where there's one where it's actually part of a university system, and others that are in Secretary of State's offices, like in Arizona. We exist because it's in statute that we provide some sort of support for the development of library services throughout Arizona. And we do have a research library and archives that supports researchers, genealogists, anyone from the public can come and use those services, but we're not a lending library. What I do day to day is actually work as a library consultant in a department called Library Development. And our whole goal is, our mission is empowering Arizona's public libraries to offer their best customer service that they can. So in that way, we really have a meta role. We are the helpers of the helpers, where those library staff and library leadership throughout the state are really on the ground doing things. We provide a lot of assistance in form of paying for databases and other resources to be used statewide. We provide a lot of continuing education opportunities for library staff. We coordinate networks in a lot of different ways. And importantly, we leverage a lot of federal funding, and we do that through subgrants so that different libraries can fund projects that will help deliver those types of services. I do occasionally get to partner with libraries to provide direct public programming, and that's some of my favorite parts of the job. And we'll do things like community archives events where we are actually training people from the community about how to take charge of the digital preservation and their own storytelling moving into the future, as well as things like how do we have libraries set up digital literacy training programs for their public. And we can get into all sorts of those areas later as well.
Yeah, no, well, and so I think let's go ahead and go now. So because you're using the terms, so I want to make sure they're defined. So let me try to be good about. Oh, this is my mom, Nicole. But anyway, let's try to be just I like introducing people. Anyway, let's try to be
really big.
Yeah.
It's
yeah, let's try to be good about defining terms, right? So, sorry, I got lost with introducing my mom. What I was going to say though, so what I hear, and I'm doing this to clarify, is that the state libraries, they provide support. So it's a middle person, it's a support staff, almost a support service. I feel like what you're saying is you all make sure that the local municipalities, like the city libraries, have, I'm sure, the training, the professional development they need, the access to like databases of like where we go and look up to see if this library has this book, or how they can borrow this book or this text from another space. Am I getting it? Like that's kind of what you all do?
Yes.
You correct me, because like if I don't get it, then maybe our audience isn't getting it. So
yes.
Yeah, more or less. Okay, so then let's talk about Mika. This is another comadre. Hey, girl. Let's talk about then what digital literacy is and what Mika's referring to here, like digital storytelling, and then also like why that's important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I actually want to start with digital equity because that's a term that is always on my mind, and that's really the framework of my work, but it's not really as understood widely, I'd say, as it needs to be quite yet. So digital equity is the condition that all communities and individuals have access to the technology and the broadband to meet their needs. And we look at that strategically through a 5-part process of digital inclusion. So that's things like affordable broadband internet service to every home and school and library. It looks like the digital literacy skills that you brought up. And so digital literacy is just the ability to use online tools effectively to meet your needs. And there's a lot of other components of that, like media literacy, safety, also an understanding of devices. But the other pieces of the digital inclusion five-legged stool, if you want to call it that, is also making sure people have access to the right devices. So sometimes people, if you only have a cell phone to do your homework or to write an essay, that doesn't really give you an even playing field to really thrive online. So we want to make sure that people have access to devices that meet their needs. It also includes tech support. So from a trusted local source, ideally. So it doesn't really get you across the line to just get a laptop and say, okay, have fun. You really will technically need ongoing support over time to be able to use it. And it is a moving target. So making sure that that support is always available and not just one and done sort of training. And then the fifth element of digital inclusion is actually relevant applications. And so for me, that's where I like to focus on from my past life as an archivist and as a linguist, is looking at making sure people can have meaningful use of that technology in a way that's going to empower their telling their own stories and being able to maybe correct things in the historic record that they've been mischaracterized or invisibilized from before.
What I was going to add was, I think if maybe people are familiar with the concept, the digital divide, right? That was a term, that's been used and thrown around for many decades now. And so when you talk about digital equity, I think it's just, I don't want to say that it's the second version. It's the evolution of this idea of the digital divide, which we're basically living right now. We have never probably been so acutely aware of the digital divide because of pandemic living and being forced to depend 100% on technology as we are now. So you shared with me, but even before you shared with me that there are parts of your job that you are frustrated by. How frustrating is it to have everyone pushed into having to depend on technology, knowing that probably the infrastructure wasn't there?
Well, you're so right that we've had this term, the digital divide, for over 20 years. Libraries, schools, everybody knew that there was a difference, that if you didn't have the internet, that you were being held back and you weren't able to offer, or for anchor institutions, you couldn't offer those equitable services. And at an individual level, you weren't able to really participate and dive in. So this has been the emphasis of my work for the past 4 years, is looking at how we can support libraries as digital equity champions locally to make sure that they're supporting their community needs, as well as to make sure that those libraries can have the digital capacity, and that comes back to the idea of infrastructure. The useful thing about the digital equity perspective is that it understands that it's not really about if there's infrastructure or not, if there's fiber connection to rural areas or not. It's actually about affordability of service, and it's about the ability to use the internet and to use all of these different technologies in a way that's meaningful. So people will think about the digital divide. They tend to think of it as a rural issue. Out there, they don't have internet, but actually more people are on the wrong side of the digital divide in urban areas because the cost of service is so expensive. And that's one of the pieces that has been frustrating to observe over the course of the pandemic that we're still in, is that there's now so much more emphasis in understanding that if you're a school kid who doesn't have internet at home, you can't do distance learning. If you're a teacher who doesn't have a computer that they can use at home, you can't do that work at the, you can't support remote learning in that way. But we're having a lot of these solutions that are really Band-Aid solutions and short-sighted, in my opinion, where we're still thinking that one-to-one laptop distribution is enough to solve the digital divide. And really, we need to expand that to think about affordability of service. We need to think about it's not just one Wi-Fi hotspot for one student learner. So we also want to think about the quality of that internet connection, that it's strong enough to support parents working from home, multiple kids using Zoom all at once, for instance. And we need people to understand that there's a whole wide spectrum of digital literacy. For some people, it really is the 101 basics of how to use a computer, how to set up an email address, how to remember how to set up your password. And then for other people, it might be, how do I retool myself to enter this new life? So it's interesting to see a lot more players and definitely a lot more agencies where digital inclusion was nowhere on their radar, but now just in order to provide services that they need to now, they have to think about these types of barriers and challenges as well. At the same time, I'm able to, representing the state, I'm able to sit at so many different tables and just hearing some business as usual type plays that aren't really able to work towards, I think, a long-term sustainable vision of digital equity.
I feel like I have so many stories that I could tell from friends, parents, students that I've taught, even just as recently as last semester, that illustrate like this digital divide. And so I want to tell one right now. So the collective, we have a brick and mortar, we have an office now, and we didn't have one before, but I was setting up our internet, and I set it up with one company, which I don't need to name, but anyway, I set it up with them. And in my mind, when I was setting it up, they told me they had 6 megabytes of connectivity, which is not a lot. Because that's so low, you guys, you have more than 6 megabytes on your freaking phone. I think in my mind, I made up 60, And then we were having I was like, it can't be 6, it's 60 megabytes. 60 is a little bit more normal, right? And so anyway, so we were struggling, with the connectivity. And when I tell you all, we're in the heart, we're basically what you would call Midtown Phoenix, so we're in the middle of the city. I can't imagine what somebody who lives in an apartment complex down the street, what they're doing if they have this service provider only getting 6 megabytes, Now, I don't know if it's because it's a business, all these kinds of things. And I get a little frustrated when I hear from technology-based entities and folks of no, this house or this office can only have this service, this speed. What's the difference? What's the difference? The internet's running, what I mean? The internet is operating, and I can call the other company, which can provide me 100 megabytes of speed. How come this company can't provide me the speed that I need, But I'd like to think I'm a smart person, and I'd like to think that I'm a person who goes after things, right? The work, you know what I mean? Then we had to set up another service call. We had to cancel one thing and go with another company. And I can't imagine if I'm a single mom, I'm an undocumented mom, I'm a person who doesn't speak the language fluently or well enough. And that's what I think about when you talk about this digital equity. Do you have any stories? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Let's get it. That's it. What you're highlighting is that's why I prefer not to use the term digital divide as a singular thing, you have it or you don't. It's actually plural, right? There's multiple divides that are different barriers. And you're exactly right that it's actually a structural scam that we don't have equitable access, for everybody, and really that we can't afford it. And if you think about ways that those structures have not really been beneficial for everybody, we think about things like redlining, where different communities were actually excluded through policy from accessing the resources that they should. That exists with broadband infrastructure. There's something called digital redlining. So that's where service providers are intentionally not upgrading infrastructure in low-income areas, charging more for worse and slower technology, and charging richer neighborhoods more, and actually investing and upgrading those. So that does exist, and it's hard to know where to, who's really advocating for those individuals. There's different ways that underserved communities are supposedly supported, and a lot of it is really emphasized on the K-12 environment. So, this school, might be qualified for different breaks or different assistance programs, but like you mentioned, there's a lot of people who fall through those cracks, and that's contributes to some of my frustration. Is we're seeing more and more opportunities for the K-12 world, but people who aren't necessarily on SNAP, or they're not necessarily registered through these different programs, they don't really have advocates in the same way that that others might. And then of course we think about that full spectrum of you actually need much faster service than you might be able to get. You need multiple devices if you have multiple people in the school, and you really need somebody who's going to be your advocate to make sure that you're getting the speeds that you pay for, and that you know how to just navigate and exist online safely and in a way that meets your needs. So it's definitely ongoing. There's so much about these large service providers that at the end of the day they're a business, and they operate that way, and so that's always been the excuse for not building out in rural areas. So it's been the local leaders, it's been the schools, it's been the libraries, it's been the hospitals who are kind of and law enforcement who are really getting priority for some of that high quality broadband infrastructure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of political will to help people get connected at home. And that's really one of the things that we're seeing change during this pandemic, especially when we think about all of the schools being closed. In Arizona, some libraries are still closed and some are not. But the classroom has really expanded to be the home. So we're looking at changing in real time of federal rules about how we're providing broadband service to different learning spaces, and if we're going to be able to spread that to the home level too. So it's really exciting to see this process, and at the same time, you're hearing arguments on either side to really reveal what people's priorities are.
I imagine that the conversation, the pushback is one of that, moving folks from thinking that digital equity or access to good digital infrastructure, that it's a luxury or an opt-in service, as opposed to, I don't know if I would call it a right, although I'm trying to just be a little neutral. I think there are some that would call it a right, and just basically essentially that, given where we're at as a community, as a society, that everything we do is based on technology, right? That it's probably, not even probably, I'm going to say this, it's equivalent to your need for water. It's equivalent to your need for gas. It's equivalent to your need for shelter, right? So if we think about how we divide up resources, now internet and technology is a resource, but since it historically has been a luxury, right? New technology has been a luxury. I imagine that what happens is people just put it off. Well, if you can't afford it, well, if you can't this, well, if you, the individual, didn't do what they needed to do, when we don't always have that same argument in the same way with other resources. Is that fair? Am I capturing
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, the policy hasn't really caught up with this reality that broadband truly is a basic human right. The United Nations has actually declared it to be a basic human right. No states have yet said that this is a fundamental human right, but you hear legislators talking about it that way now, where broadband infrastructure is the #1 priority for a lot of decision makers, because there's finally a recognition that it's bipartisan, and we see how it touches so many spheres and is really just the underlying necessity to participate in all levels. And so much of my time is really thinking about working with decision makers at that level. But we kind of mentioned my bio a little bit, and in my heart of hearts, it's a return to cultural survival, really. And that was how I found myself in this funny role anyway. I was working as a community archivist, working on native language documentation and preservation projects. And I didn't have the vocabulary for this at the time when I was doing that work back in the day, but I was seeing things like, well, this community, they don't have a computer center where the community can come and access all of these digitized language recordings. And the elders that I was trying to help me with some of the descriptions and recording different languages, they weren't comfortable using that technology either. And so I found myself in this role of also training on using some of those programs and explaining data structures. And at that time, I didn't realize that what I was seeing was the impact of digital inequity on cultural and language survival. And that's always in the back of my head, even though day to day I don't get to do as much of that. But when I think about the long-term visions and the ripples I'm trying to send out, it is making sure that everybody can have the ability to do that on their own terms as well. Otherwise, non-community organizations, large research universities, colonial collecting agencies like the State Library and Archives are going to be the ones who are telling those stories. So for me, digital equity includes the ability of Native communities, but all communities to really be in charge of that process as well.
So much there. So yeah, so essentially for, like you said, for more voices to be represented in history. Mika called out your term of the invisibilized, right? To give more people the ability to tell their own story, is what I'm hearing. So sorry, I'm managing also that, like, we have a good question over here and I'm trying to bring that in. So let me bring that question in because that's where my mind is going. So Cecily, so she's saying hi from Arkansas. She's asking how widespread is public internet access in our state of Arizona, that she's seen public access to the internet in cities that she's visited. How do you envision that happening for other cities or territories, which are important here?
Yep. Well, it really varies in terms of public funds going to support internet access. That's typically happening through schools and libraries. If you look at your phone bill, you have a little extra tax called the Universal Service Fund, and that is actually being shared back out through a complicated reimbursement model to pay for internet service at schools and libraries. So that's one way that public funds get used. Not in Arizona, but in other parts of the country, we're seeing more housing groups offer internet service for all of their residents. We're seeing some initiatives at the city levels where the city is investing in increased public Wi-Fi access, including the city of Tucson, which is starting this new initiative to actually specifically target low-income households to make sure that they have access to internet to meet their education needs. So it does vary. In Arizona, if we look at the census data, in Arizona, we know that there's actually still about 1 million people who do not have broadband internet access at the home, but we know that that infrastructure is underlying, and it really is available. Another piece of it is to think about the amount of providers who are available in an area. So if maybe that provider is saying that they cover that area, maybe you have 2 choices of a provider, but in reality, you might only have 1 choice of provider. So that's another form of inequity. There haven't been a lot of, at the state government level, there haven't been too many initiatives to support widespread internet use. That's more so trickling in through supporting schools and libraries for things like I use public funds that we get or federal funds that we get so that libraries can start Wi-Fi hotspot lending programs so that they can then check out a hotspot to a student or to a library patron to use it at home. But of course, that's not sustainable by any means. And at the end of the day, it's not the library's job to make sure that everybody has access to a basic utility. So we are seeing it we are seeing it change a little bit, and especially in this, these rounds of coronavirus stimulus packages, there's more money that's specifically for digital equity causes, and that's slowly getting distributed through states, and that support is happening in different ways. One piece of it is this thing called the emergency broadband benefit, which is actually a $50 a month subsidy for people. Of course, you have to qualify for a lot of these existing government assistance programs to be able to get that. But I see it as a good step in really addressing that affordability barrier and getting more people connected.
It also it shows us how, again, some of the scams, I'm going to be really intentional about that use of that word, right? If our government in an emergency basis can provide support for folks to kind of get the digital and the technological connectivity that they need, then that means that they could have done it before, right? And it means that there was a sort of infrastructure and process that could have been occurring. So that whole digital divide, digital equity issue that occurred for like the 3 decades before this didn't have to happen, That's point one. Point two is, it makes me aware of or I think about what do we do? How do I not notice or fail to notice that maybe there are digital equity issues? And I'm thinking about whenever we just accept that oh, you know what? It's a rural area, or, oh, for some reason, you can't have higher speed internet here. And we just stop and we don't ask more questions. Often we're doing it because if we're not impacted, we don't want to make someone else maybe feel embarrassed for what may be lack of payment or inability to afford something. But that's the problem. That's the inherent problem, that thing that makes us feel uncomfortable. I don't want to ask because maybe there's a lack of funding. Is why does it have to remain at the purview of the individual, right? Mm-hmm. Why, when essentially one person, you can't go, stick a rod in the ground and go get your internet. You are dependent upon state-based services to get this, right? And I think we get stuck a lot in that kind of stuff when we just put it on individual choice. This is not a matter of individual choice. Like the example I gave you, where in Phoenix, where our office is, from one company, we could only get 6 megabytes of connectivity. That wasn't a choice.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And, for the tech nerds, 6 megabytes per second download speed, that doesn't even meet the federal definition of broadband service. It's actually 25 megabits down. And, the powers that be are the ones who are defining that. And we know that 25 megs down is not sufficient for all the uses that it has today either. And yet it's difficult to really define the problem with this moving target, and especially when, federal agencies can say this is what qualifies as service, but we know the reality is that you're not really having broad access in that sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for, kind of bringing in just all these facts, important facts too. It provides context, so that's the one thing. And I think I want to also acknowledge, you are also providing facts and knowledge in these really well-timed nuggets that allow us to understand why something's more of a problem. Here I am giving a story, and then you're allowing us to kind of see it in a bigger picture with that information. We are quickly running out of time. We haven't talked about, I know, it flies.
I remembered what I was thinking as you were making that last comment, because and I really do feel like when I talk about bringing my whole self and all these parts of me, I'm really split. On the one hand, I am a state employee and I'm supporting the project of the state and the response that has and hasn't really worked out in a lot of ways. And then the other half of me is involved in these efforts that are trying to respond directly to community where the state has been unable to do so. And I think I'm just going to continue to be in this messy space for my whole life. But it's been definitely interesting during this past year to observe, really how we're caring for each other, and
We're not.
how I can make decisions as myself in one role that I think will have long-term impacts, and in another role in a way that I know is going to be really building a better future for all of us.
Yes. And I sorry if I interrupted. I said, or not, the ways that we're taking care of one another or not taking care of one another, And so I hear that how you're, we talk about it a lot in the collective, how you're walking in two worlds, two different worlds. Some of us got to do that to pay bills. Some of us have to do it because we're on our way. We're on our way to kind of getting to be an integrated person. And so until that happens, we're going to walk over here and walk over there and go through some discomfort for a little while until we figure out how to bring in both all the multiple worlds, right, that we stand in, that we occupy. I would be remiss if I forgot to mention, I want to, acknowledge Women's History Month as well. And so I just have just one quick question, I guess, to wrap this up. What brought you into this work outside of your interest in like cultural preservation of language and things like that? How did you come to this?
Oh my goodness. I was in the right place at the right time. I truly was. And it was, from my work as an archivist that I was first hired with the state library. And because of the work that my colleagues had really done to support a lot of tribal library services, the state library was selected to participate in this big digital inclusion project. And being in the right place at the right time, I was just invited to take that on, and it became long-term. And we all acknowledged, oh, this isn't a 1-year sort of project. This is actually a long-term building and structural change. So I think, I was really just lucky. But I will say that throughout my career so far, it's been women who have been my bosses, who have seen something in me and have given me these different opportunities and have helped create, kind of create these chances for me. So I'm at this point in my career now where I'm really seeing how I can invest in the next generation of Indigenous information professionals as well. So I'm just kind of looking forward to continuing that chain.
Yeah, I'm just reaching back. Yes. Thank you. So Nicole Umayam, I learned how to pronounce your last name instead of Umayam. That's another conversation we can have. But Nicole, thank you. Thank you. I love you. But it is so nice. We talk about how in the collective, we really just are comadres. We hang out with one another. We support one another. We don't sit in our professional spaces with one another very often. So it's just so cool to get to see how much of a badass you are in this way, and to have this conversation with you. And I wish you the best. I'm going to miss you a ton, but I wish you the best in Flagstaff. And I hope that you get everything that you want out of that you're able to kind of cultivate all of that space, to kind of catapult yourself into the next professional phase that you see yourself going into, and then that you bring it back so that we can still hang out when you come back.
Of course. Enjolie, I love you so much. Thank you for, what you're building here, and even just the space of honest checking in with others. Like I see how much that's really impacting everybody that you're in community with and in relation to. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Everyone else, have a great weekend. Please remember to like this, share this. Thank you for all the people that are there in the comments. And if I didn't say your name, I definitely probably streamed your comment if I noticed it, along our screen here. Again, take care of yourself, rest, and we will see you back here next week with Jason Burke Alexander. All right, everyone, take care.